Hi everyone, my name is Deger and I'm at the AI Objectives Institute. The thing I want to talk about here is how can we use the technology of today to go beyond simple preferences and outcomes-based modeling of society. At AOI, we are interested in building the institutions of the future, and how can technology that we're developing right now be able to be deployed in a way that the transformative technology ultimately yields for beneficial deployment. I want to start by one of the core questions we see in voting from social choice theory on discursive dilemma that Philip Petit explores quite a bit. This idea is that depending on the way questions are asked during polling or majority voting, it is possible to reach conflicting conclusions. A simple example that demonstrates this is if we have three different groups and we ask these three groups that are in the same size with each other three questions about a new policy. Say we want to improve the roads on the street. We say, do we have enough budget? Is this issue important enough to proceed? And are we ready to deploy the solution right now? Say each group says yes to two questions and says no to one question. Now, if we ask the question, is each condition met independently? Yes, the majority of people did say we have enough budget. The majority of people did say the issue is important enough. And on an individual level, if these questions are asked, we can proceed to say, yes, we should move forward with the repair. If you look at it the other way, are all three conditions met? As the question that we are asking, no one actually said, yes, we have met all three conditions. So depending on the question we ask, we would actually reach the opposing conclusion. Furthermore, preferences as stated can, and they very much do change and evolve based on the actions and their consequences. We have seen this with Brexit, where the UK has updated its majority opinion saying maybe that wasn't a great idea for us to leave. So the question is, how can we build institutions that can evolve through time as the public is updating their values and creating a space for this to be discussed? The framework I want to introduce is to think about rules and standards. A rule may be in a residential neighborhood we should drive less than 15 miles an hour. A standard instead may be drive responsibly. Drive responsibly is inherently imprecise. We are entering a paradigm where language models are able to capture imprecise information about people's preferences, opinions, values, and are able to reflect this. This hasn't happened before. Now, the question is, are we able to leverage this in a healthy way that can yield the language model and AI power towards getting to better deliberation without replacing the human in the loop, but being able to empower different viewpoints that exist? The building block we are thinking about at the AI Objectives Institute is to think about action guiding principles. Let's ask better questions, not just why A is a better option over B, but why should A be preferred over B? And what are cases where A may not be preferred over B? This allows us to look at more detailed granularity instead of thinking of a final vote that is towards an outcome or towards a preference. What is the process that guides an action? What are the principles that guides the action? So the question is, how can we discover these at scale? Say we should not drive faster than 15 miles an hour so that the kids in the neighborhood can play safely and the streets will be quiet. Unless there's a healthcare related urgency. One might say, yeah, drive responsibly, but if something is really urgent, I guess we would be okay for you to go fast, even though that broke the rule, that broke the law. These guiding principles allows us to explore the reasoning that generates these preferences. And the question is, are we able to bring that to the center of decision making for collectives, for our regulations? And can AI help identify these synergies and edge cases? That is what we are interested in. So we have built a prototype called Talk to the City, and I want to give a very quick demo of that. This prototype actually uses police data, the one that I'm going to show you, on basically what you see here is every cluster on the screen is a different cluster of people that share a similar opinion. These clusters are representing opinions rather than people. So you yourself might end up on many different clusters at once. We are both using the demographic information for each of the for each of these clusters, and also pairing it with any other metadata we can have, their similarity to other views and the linguistic content of the clusters themselves. So say you have a cluster called legalizing marijuana. Within this, we have three different viewpoints on marijuana should be legalized or should not be legalized due to increased crime, drug use, health risks. You can engage with any of these as an individual viewpoint and ask questions to these clusters. Why do you believe this? And the system will be trained on only the responses that are from these clusters and be able to give you a response. But what then this becomes interesting with is you're able to ask questions on how does this cluster compare with other clusters? Are we able to use a correlational approach when we can have these different viewpoints that are independently represented to discuss with each other, to identify cruxes and synergies? There's a lot of discussion right now on AI policy. Say we are eliciting a number of different principles, such as LLMs should never pretend to be a psychiatrist. LLMs should prioritize improving the user's mental health, or LLMs should offer support to low-income communities. Using AI, it is actually quite possible to identify what are some edge cases between these three scenarios that might cause some principles to be supported and some principles to be violated. And using this iterative approach, seeing which principles are actually in sync or in conflict with each other, we're able to come up with better policies. These policies can leverage the power of simulation without necessarily removing the human in the loop, but by being able to identify points of synergy or points of cruxes so that they can be surfaced back in a human town hall deliberation. And we can do this with the current talk to the city clusters. So you can ask, is this principle in conflict with the other principle? Say, legalizing medical marijuana would provide relief to those with chronic illnesses. And the system can give a response. A principle that is compatible with both opinions could be that marijuana should only be legalized for medical purposes under strict regulation and supervision. This can be applied at scale between every principle that has been elicited. And then we would be able to identify which principles actually have the highest convergence so that we can push them towards a simple rank-based voting and say, these are principles that the systems, the institutions we are building should abide by. Or which principles should basically continue in subsequent deliberations so we can iron this out further. So we're exploring a 5-step approach starting from elicitation. And in the elicitation step, we are combining both expert and demographically diverse surveys. This was something that was brought up by many of you in your talks as well. The questions need to be worded in a way that elicit action guiding principles that really underline what are cases that this might not be a good idea and why is this a good idea. On top of that, we can use different organization structures. We're combining semantic information with recommender system style information and identifying different clusters. This enables also the capability to maintain the transparency and the interpretability. You should be able to have the system evaluate any two opinions, any two principles, and these can be done to your own opinion as well as you're contributing. Once all these cruxes are identified using this, we basically, what are the highest synergies, which elicitations are forming cruxes, we are able to move forward to say we can formalize the ones that seem to have large-scale agreement. We can use a traditional vote or some form of council that finalizes this. And further cruxes can be iterated by, what are better wordings that we may come up with that can go back to a collection of surveys or focusing on the legislators first. And this can create a continuous system that can update based on new things are happening. We saw this with COVID happening. The world is moving at a faster pace right now. We won't necessarily have time to wait for the Senate to be able to be assembled, et cetera, et cetera. So how can we build systems that can iterate fast without necessarily needing to convene in person all the time? This approach, looking at Elster and Petit's explorations on what are the deliberative democratic ideals, we believe satisfies both the inclusivity constraints, which is that everyone should be able to contribute and vote, the judgmental constraint, which is we should have both in-person discussions on the common concerns about which resolutions should be preferred, and also lean on AI to be able to generate these. And also dialogical constraints, which is that the discourse should be happening on an in-person or like open and unforced dialogue with one another. That's about it. Thank you, everyone. Yes, so this basically is an agreement metric between different principles. So there's a couple different approaches to be able to elicit this. A simple one would be how many people that holds this principle would also agree with this other principle. This is something you can get from a system with no AI. This is just simple recommender system. Like Polis basically creates clusters using this framework. Or you can bring on a level of natural language on top of this as well, where you can ask language models to score how much in agreement are these two cases. How many edge cases are able to be identified that form a crux. If you're able to augment the system with this metadata, it ends up being more powerful because we're moving away from just who is sharing ideas with each other towards the actual underlying content of the idea itself. And that is really important, to go to action guiding principles to become the vocabulary of the negotiation, rather than just using a recommender system that says, these people also seem to agree with this. Where is the majority line? So yeah. Absolutely. I think each of these steps is an independent step. And a lot of our philosophy here actually goes all the way back to Eric Drexler's open agency model, where instead of creating a monolith that can make decisions, be it a government or AI, which is usually the case we're thinking about in these steps, are we able to create independent modules that have their own goals, but when synergized together is able to create the outcome? So yeah, I've talked plenty with Aviv, and it's quite formative for me to understand, what are ways in which we should be implementing simulations and AI power into deliberation systems. So ultimately, we can bring people together. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you, everyone.